I'm Vinay Ravuri, CEO of EdgeQ. It's a 5G chip company based out of Bay Area in California, but also we have a very large development center in Bangalore. In fact, one of my, or two of our employees are here somewhere. Raise your hand, Hari. He and Sriram, they run the center here. In fact, Hari runs the center. So my talk today is going to be about what it takes to build a 5G system on a chip right here in India from scratch. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of talks today about 5G, but probably not one like this. In fact, I wish someone had given this talk and I was present 5 years ago, because I wouldn't have made some mistakes that we made in the company. All right, cool. Before we get into the chip aspect, let me kind of take you back first on what 5G is, and even before that, how 4G and 2G and 3G came along, because it's important to see how these things transition. Each of these Gs transition every 10 years. So 4G started in 2010, 3G in 2000, and so on and so forth. But what's interesting about 4G and 3G is that their main use case was a cell phone, basically, talking on the phone. However, the secondary use case over time became bigger than the primary use case. For example, 4G, even though you do use the phone to talk, what you use it for a lot more than that is to browse the web, whether it's video streaming or using your favorite app, whatever it is. So the secondary applications are super important in this space. In 5G, it's also very similar. What's called enhanced mobile broadband, what it is making the cell phone or just general 4G type of use cases a lot more enhanced in terms of the experience. But there is a revolutionary part of 5G that's most important, and I would say that's the one that 5G really differentiates itself, which is the mission critical aspect of 5G. Low latency, high reliability, things like factory use cases, telemedicine use cases. There's a bunch of things that require the latency to be sub-milliseconds. And also, these networks need to be extremely nimble and very, very flexible, much like the cloud. Given the private aspect of these networks, you also have to be able to have high security built into this network as well, meaning that you may not be able to go out to a central cloud like you do in 4G, for example. If you look at today's 4G network, right? So the way things look is if you make a phone call or you, let's say, are watching some video, it goes through what's called a RAN network, radio access network. That's basically the cell tower in a simplistic form. But from there, it goes out to a central cloud. The central cloud being something like Google or Amazon, where you may get your video streamed from there. And these central cloud locations tend to be very, very far from the source of the data. So if you're watching a video here, your actual data may actually be tens of thousands of miles away. In mission critical applications, that's not going to work, because just simple physics dictates that the delay in propagation delay itself is going to be too long, too far away. So what one has to do is move the compute element or the data itself, where, for example, if it's sourced over in a factory, the compute has to move closer to the data. And sometimes people call this edge computing, because that's a huge difference in paradigm that 4G is used to. In 5G, you're looking at moving the entire data center, if you will, out to a location that may be very small. So power, things like cost, these things make a big, big difference. And for 5G to really realize its potential, one has to change this paradigm quite a bit. And that's something that's really important for companies like ours who make chips, because fundamentally, at the end of the day, chips power this entire thing. So this is a view into what a RAN network may look like, what a base station looks like. So you may be used to a cell tower that's out on the streets. What a cell tower looks like is you have on the top an antenna. An antenna, what it does is radiates meaning it transmits electromagnetic waves. You can also receive those electromagnetic waves. And then there's an RF entity, sometimes called an RU, radio unit, that's responsible for taking that the RF data and maybe do a little bit of processing. And there's a cable and typically fiber, and there's a protocol called eCPRI that runs through that to a lower element called BBU or a DU in ORAN terminology, baseband unit or distributed unit as it's called. And what goes inside these boxes is a chip that much looks like what's listed over there. There's in this case, this is an EdgeQ specific processor. RISC-V based complex in here dictates that we run an lower PHY and upper PHY, so the physical layer of 5G, for example, that's actually one of the most important things that could run as an RU or a DU, or if you combine them together, what's called layer 1, upper PHY and lower PHY, you may get a small cell. People sometimes call those small cells G node B. There is another component in this SoC called the ARM CPUs, as you see. ARM or x86 sometimes, that's as it's used, runs layer 2, layer 3 stack of the chip or of that protocol. Layer 2, layer 3 is a very important one because that is sort of the interface between IP packets and 5G. So that's sort of the demarcation essentially. And the last but not least is RF. RF interface, that's what helps you radiate. So you need to have some sort of a chipset that sits outside, connects to a chip like ours. But if it's in the context of ORAN, you're looking at something like an eCPRI, which is another protocol. So all in all, when you put all this together, you get a 5G chip. And this is a pretty complex chip, I should say, because typically this is done with 6 or 7 chips in the industry today. So now to the central theme of this talk, which is what does it take to build such a chip? And this is actually an example of EdgeQ. This is what it took us to build this chip. First, it takes 200 people, 4 years, $100 million, multiple sites, and multiple cuts at the chip, meaning multiple spins. So let me go through one by one. 200 people, this is 200 engineers, expertise in baseband, RF, firmware, device drivers, very low-level software. And you need 4 years for that, of these people. You can't build this in 2 years. 2 years is even if you had 2x the people, it's just not possible to squish this into 2 years. It's very difficult and it's almost impossible, I would say. People have tried and taken 4, 8, 9, 10 years and failed, in fact. This is actually not a simple thing to do. Next is probably the most difficult of building a chip is raising money. If you're going to do this from scratch and as a new company, you're looking at raising $100+ million. So if you go to an investor and say, I want $100 million to build a chip, most likely they'll just say, no, thank you, because this is too much money for someone, for a private investor. This is an interesting thing because we're headquartered out of Silicon Valley, we have access to investors, and we are fortunate and lucky that we've been able to raise this kind of money. I would say that this is probably where India, the most of the headwinds for India might be, because teams here exist. They can certainly build such a chip because we have our guys building it at EdgeQ. Certainly locations, you can have multiple locations, and you can do all of the above, but the funding is probably the most difficult part in this picture. But certainly it can be done. We've done it, so why not? Someone else can do this in India. But perhaps you don't take a large risk like this by building a massive chip, but perhaps you can go something smaller. There's a lot of opportunities to build CAD tools, a lot of opportunities to build IP specific components inside a chip. A lot of opportunity to build pre-silicon tools, I would say, because most of these things are like a duopolies nowadays in the US, and they're all, I would say, they're so consolidated that there's a huge opportunity for companies to disrupt that entire model, all in silicon as well as tools that go into silicon. What does all this get you? This is a little bit about our company. By building this chipset, this is what we've been able to accomplish with it. We are half the power, half the cost, and almost 1/10 the space, whether it's a small cell or Open RAN, as you see. And these are things that we have already done. We've integrated north of 6 chips into a single chip. It's a pretty massive undertaking, and it requires a certain type of a team. As I said, some of our colleagues are here, but this is just not vaporware. It's actually a product that we have. We've implemented this. You can go see this in one of our meeting rooms. It's 511 number 4. Please come by and we'll show you a demo for this entire thing end-to-end working. And one other thing I would say before I stop is that it takes a certain type of team to do this. To be in a startup, you have to commit yourself to 4+ years. And on top of it, you also have to have experience doing such a thing. Our background is from Qualcomm, Intel, and Broadcom, so we've done this a few times, so we know how to build chips, and not just chips, but chips for this particular space, cellular space. But if you have all of the above, I would say this is a great time to go build 5G or 6G chips, because I think the world needs a lot more of them. There are just not enough companies building them. They're super consolidated nowadays. Okay, with that, thank you.